Thomas was 19 years old and already an expert in disappearing. Out in the fields they called him Ghost, not because he was pale, but because he knew how to erase himself. Head down, hands moving, eyes never lifting higher than a man's boots. In a world where being noticed could get you whipped, sold, or buried, invisibility was the closest thing to armor. So when the overseer's shout cut across the cotton rows, it felt like a gun going off. "Boy, Thomas, Master wants you at the house." Now, every pair of hands around him stuttered for a heartbeat, then sped up. Nobody looked at him, but he could feel their fear pressing in on his back like heat from a fire. You didn't get called to the big house from the fields. Not unless something bad was coming. Thomas straightened slowly, heart pounding so hard it made his vision pulse. He wiped his hands on his trousers out of habit, as if that would make any difference to whatever waited up there. He had been on this Georgia plantation his whole life. He knew its sounds and smells the way a sailor knew the sea. The crack of a whip in the distance, the distant rumble of wagon wheels, the sweet, rotting perfume of cotton in bloom. Usually, those sounds blurred together into one long, endless day. Today, every detail felt sharp enough to cut. As he walked toward the big house, he tried to think of anything he'd done wrong. Had he spoken out of turn? Slowed his work? Missed some order? His mind ran through the last week like pages flipping in a book, searching for the one line that would damn him. He couldn't find it. The Caldwell house rose ahead of him like something from another world. White columns, wide porch, green shutters. It looked almost peaceful from far away, like a painting. Up close, Thomas knew better. Every board, every brick, every swing of that pretty white door was paid for in backs and blood. He went around to the servants' entrance as always. Before he could knock, the door yanked open, and Matilda, the head house servant, grabbed his arm. She was in her 40s, with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, but her fingers trembled where they dug into his sleeve. "Listen to me, boy," she hissed, pulling him inside. "Master's gone to town. Mistress wants you to clean their bedroom." Thomas blinked. That made even less sense. Field hands didn't clean bedrooms. Field hands didn't go upstairs. Field hands stayed where dirt hid them. Matilda leaned closer, voice dropping to a whisper. "You don't speak unless spoken to. You don't look her in the eye. You don't touch nothing that ain't a rag or a broom. You hear me?" "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. Her grip tightened. "And Thomas?" He met her gaze for half a second. There was something in her expression that looked too close to fear. "If anything feels wrong, you keep your mouth shut and your head low. There's more than one way to die on this plantation." She let him go and thrust a broom and a folded dust cloth into his hands, then jerked her chin toward the grand staircase. He'd seen that staircase plenty of times from the hallway. It always seemed like a river of polished wood flowing up into some bright, unreachable world. Today, ascending, it felt like walking toward the gallows. Each step boomed in his head. 1, 2, 3. At the top, the carpet softened his footfalls, but his heartbeat was still loud enough to make him feel exposed. The master's bedroom door waited at the end of the corridor. Heavy, tall, carved from dark oak. The kind of door that made a man feel small before he even knocked. Thomas swallowed. His knuckles rapped quietly once. Twice. "Enter," came a woman's voice from the other side. Calm, controlled, not impatient, not kind, just sure. He pushed the door open and stepped inside, eyes fixed on the floorboards like Matilda had said. The room didn't smell like sweat, dirt, and boiled cornmeal, like the slave quarters. It smelled of lavender, beeswax, and something faintly floral he couldn't name. Sunlight poured through tall windows, catching specks of dust in the air and turning them into slow, drifting stars. A thick rug swallowed his boots. The bed was big enough to hold a family. There were porcelain figures on the mantel, tiny white ladies frozen mid-dance, each one probably worth more than his life. "You must be Thomas." The way she said his name made his head snap up before he could stop himself. Eleanor Caldwell sat by the window with a book open on her lap, framed by lace curtains and afternoon light. Not old, like he'd imagined a plantation mistress should be. Maybe only a few years beyond 20. with chestnut hair pinned loosely at the back of her neck and eyes the color of honey. Her dress was blue, not one of the massive jeweled gowns he'd seen on Sundays. But even this simple day dress was finer than anything he'd ever touched. Thomas's gaze jerked back down to the rug, heat pricking the back of his neck. "Yes, ma'am," he managed, fingers tightening around the broom handle. He was suddenly aware of everything wrong about him in this room: dirt under his nails, sweat stains on his rough shirt, calloused hands that had never held anything as delicate as the objects around him. What was he doing here? Why him? "Look at me, please." Her voice was soft, not a shout, not a command dripping with contempt, but still a command. Every instinct in him screamed no. Matilda's warning echoed in his ears. Don't look her in the eye. He'd seen what happened to men who forgot that rule. He could still picture Jacob kicking at the end of a rope, the crowd watching and not watching at the same time. "I said, look at me." Her tone sharpened just enough to scrape. "No one will know." That sentence was a lie. On a plantation, someone always knew. There was always a set of eyes in the wrong corner, a pair of ears behind the wrong door. But there was something else in her voice too, something not like the master. Not amused cruelty, not boredom. Curiosity. Slowly, like a man lifting the lid on something that might bite, Thomas raised his eyes. He braced himself for the flash of offense, the sharp intake of breath, the anger. It didn't come. Eleanor Caldwell was studying him the way a person might study a map. Carefully, intently, as if she was trying to trace lines nobody else could see. "Do you know why I asked for you?" she asked. His mouth felt dry. "No, ma'am." She closed the book in her lap with a soft thump and set it aside. The leather cover caught the light, letters on the spine glinting in gold. He couldn't read them from here, but his eyes still tracked them out of habit. "I've watched you in the fields," she said, standing. "You're different." That made him want to laugh. Almost. Different? He bent, he picked, he bled, same as everyone else. "You observe," she went on, walking toward him. Each step made her skirts whisper against the floor. "You think. You don't just move your hands because a man with a whip tells you to." She stopped close enough that he could smell her rosewater and starch, and beneath that, the faint, clean scent of skin that had never been beaten under the sun. "And," she added quietly, "I believe you can read." For a second, the room tilted. Reading was not a skill here. It was a crime. It was a line you did not cross. And yet she had just stepped over it like it was nothing. Thomas's throat clenched. "No, ma'am," he said automatically. The words came out rough, thin. "Don't lie to me." She didn't raise her voice. Somehow that made it worse. "Last month, when that newspaper blew across the yard, I saw your eyes following the lines, your lips moving." He remembered that moment too well. The flimsy paper skittering along the ground like it wanted to escape, his hands snatching it up before anyone else noticed. Not out of disobedience, but hunger. His eyes drinking in letters his mama had taught him, one by one, in dim cabin light years ago. "I pay attention," Eleanor said. "No one else noticed, but I did." He forced his hands still at his sides, fingers twitching with the memory of the paper's texture. If she told the master, the whipping post would be the best he could hope for. There were worse things than pain, like being sold away, like disappearing from the only people who still knew your name. "My husband," her mouth twisted very slightly on the word, "believes women's minds are too delicate for serious reading. Philosophy, politics, ledgers, that's not for ladies, he says." She turned from him and walked to a painting hanging on the far wall. Thomas had seen it before from the hallway when doors were left half open. Rolling green hills, a bright sky, freedom, trapped in a frame. Without ceremony, she reached up, gripped the frame, and swung it forward on hidden hinges. Behind it was a small recess lined with dark cloth. Books, papers, bundles of letters tied with string. "My husband would beat me if he knew about this," she said calmly. "This is my forbidden knowledge." She looked at him over her shoulder, one eyebrow raised. "And we each have ours, don't we?" Thomas stood rooted to the rug, Every story his mother had ever whispered about men vanishing, about tongues cut out for knowing too much, pressed in against his skull. You had a mother who taught you your letters, Thomas, Eleanor said, as if reciting a fact from one of her books. You had a sister, Lily. The name dropped like a stone in a pond. She was sold away. You've been listening, watching, hoping for any scrap about where she went ever since. The air left his lungs in a rush. How do you know that? His voice was hoarse. Because I live in this house, she said quietly, turning back to him fully now. And people think I don't listen. They think I'm just... She gestured at herself with a brittle smile. Decoration. She let the painting swing back into place. The green hills vanished behind the pastoral scene, leaving only the same room, the same bed, the same woman who suddenly seemed far more dangerous than he'd first thought. I need someone I can trust, she went on. Someone intelligent. Someone with everything to lose if he breathes one wrong word. Trust? The word felt foreign in his mouth. You want to trust a slave? I want to trust a man who has survived 19 years in a world designed to break him, she said. That takes a particular kind of mind. She crossed to the dressing table, opened a drawer, and pulled out a small key. Brass. Old. She held it out to him. This opens my husband's private cabinet in his study, she said. Inside are ledgers and letters he would kill to protect. Proof he's been stealing from my inheritance for years. Proof he's been selling more than just cotton. Proof he's been dealing in weapons and making friends in places that should terrify him. Thomas didn't move. Why are you telling me this? He asked quietly. Because I can't do what needs doing alone. She held the key steady, her arm not wavering. I need someone who can read and write. Someone small enough, in his eyes, to be invisible. You already know how to be invisible, don't you, Ghost? The nickname hit him with unexpected force. To hear it from her mouth made the room feel smaller. You'd have me steal from him? Thomas asked. Not steal, she corrected. Copy. Her eyes sharpened. Every figure, every name, every shipment he thinks is secret. She took a step closer. He could see the freckles across the bridge of her nose, the faint crease between her brows that expensive creams hadn't smoothed. Up close, she didn't look untouchable. She looked trapped. In return, she said, I'll give you what you want most. He almost laughed. There were things a man like him didn't even let himself name out loud. Freedom, she said simply. The word hung between them like a lit match over oil. My father's family in Boston will take me in, once I have proof of what Charles has done, she continued. They have influence, money, lawyers. They can draw up papers that say you're a free man. They can give you enough to start over in the North. His heart slammed against his ribs. Boston, North. Words from stories, from whispered fantasies in the cabins at night. And Lily, Eleanor added quietly. The real records of her sale are in his study. If we find them, you'll know where she was sent. With freedom and time, you might find her. His mother's face rose from memory, tired but stubborn, whispering over and over. Look after your sister, boy. You promise me. You look after her. He hadn't. He couldn't. She'd been torn from him at 11 and he'd been powerless to stop it. Now this white woman, this mistress, was telling him there might be a way to keep a promise he'd already failed. And if I say no? His voice came out low. Then you go back to the fields, Eleanor said. You bend your back and keep your eyes down, and we never speak of this again. I find another way. She paused. But I don't think you'll say no. I've seen the way you look toward the north at sundown, like a man listening for a song he's never heard, but somehow still remembers. It was too much. Too specific. Too true. How do I know you won't trade me for your own safety? He asked. Tell your husband I can read. Put it all on me. Come out clean. For the first time, something like hurt flickered across her face. She opened a small locket hanging at her neck and turned it toward him. Inside was a tiny painted face, a little girl with dark eyes and a serious mouth. My daughter, Eleanor said softly. She lives with my sister in Massachusetts. Charles says she's better off there than with a nervous's mother. Bitterness, edged her tone. It's been 3 years since I held her. Every day I stay here, I lose another day with her. I have no safety to trade you for, only a chance to break both our cages at once. Silence settled over the room, thick and heavy. Thomas looked at the key in her hand, at the locket, at the tidy, polished world around them that he had never been meant to enter. In his mind, he saw Jacob's body swinging, Lily being dragged away, his mother's hands guiding his finger over crude letters scratched in dirt. This is A. This is B. You remember, Thomas. You remember even when I'm gone. He had lived his whole life trying not to be noticed. Now, the only way out might be to become the most dangerous thing on the plantation, a slave who knew too much. Eleanor didn't move, didn't plead. She just waited, arm outstretched, like this moment had already been written somewhere. Years ago. Thomas stepped forward. The key felt too heavy for its size when it touched his palm. For a second, his fingers brushed hers. Both of them flinched at the contact, as if the conspiracy itself was hot. This will get you into the cabinet, she said. Tomorrow, I'll have you sent to fix the windows in the study. There's a hidden room behind the wall left over from the days when this house hid runaways heading north. You'll see. He slid the key into the inside pocket of his shirt, close to his skin. It might as well have been a brand. At the west edge of town, she added, voice dropping again. There's a cooperage. Belongs to a free man named Solomon Pike. If anything goes wrong, if I disappear, if this plan falls apart, you go to him. You tell him the mockingbird still sings. He'll know what it means. Thomas swallowed hard. Trust no one with this, she said, pausing at the doorway. Not your friends. Not the old men who talk too much. On a plantation, survival turns people into knives they never meant to be. She slipped out, the soft swish of her dress fading down the hall. Thomas stood alone in the master's bedroom with a broom in his hand, a key burning against his chest, and a future he had never dared imagine suddenly hovering in front of him like a mirage. He moved to the window and began to dust, because he had to do something ordinary with his hands or he might scream. Outside, the fields stretched to the horizon in endless rows, white flecks of cotton catching the sun. Beyond that, swamp. Beyond that, river. Beyond that, the rest of the world. Places he had only seen as faint names on scraps of newsprint. Ghosts weren't supposed to dream about those places. Ghosts were supposed to float unnoticed until they faded away. He watched the wind ripple through the cotton and realized, with a cold clarity that felt almost like peace, that there was no safe path left to him anymore. Safety had been an illusion all along. By the time the sun slid down and painted the room in amber light, he had made his choice. He would help Eleanor Caldwell. He would copy those documents. He would risk his life for a chance at freedom and a name written on a page beside his sister's. For 19 years, Thomas had survived by making himself invisible. Now, for the first time, he was about to step into the one place a man like him was never supposed to exist, the middle of the story. Rain came before dawn, a hard, sudden storm that hammered the cabins and turned the dirt paths into brown rivers of mud. Thunder rolled across the fields like cannon fire. The storm should have sent Thomas back under his thin blanket, grabbing a few more minutes of sleep. But his eyes were already open when the downpour began. He hadn't slept more than an hour anyway. His body ached from work. His hands ached from fear. His mind ached from the weight of a brass key pressed against his chest through the night, like a secret heartbeat. He sat up slowly. 4 men slept around him, breathing heavy, exhausted from yesterday's labor. One snored, one muttered through dreams, one twitch-kicked the side of the bunk. Ordinary noises, the kind that had filled his nights for years. And yet everything felt different now, as if the storm outside wasn't just weather, but a warning. As if thunder was trying to speak. Get up, Thomas. There's no going back. He slipped out from under the thin blanket, careful not to wake anyone, and stepped outside into the rain. The moment the door shut, the downpour swallowed him, soaking him to the skin in seconds. He didn't care. The cold shock helped. It cut through the fog in his head and brought him fully awake. He crossed the yard to the well, and began drawing water for washing. The rope was slick under his fingers, the wooden bucket jerking as wind shoved against it. He splashed the water over his face and let the cold bite through him. "You're up early." Thomas froze. The voice came from behind him, low and gravelly but not unkind. He turned slowly. Samuel stood in the rain without flinching, as if storms were nothing more than passing moods. He was old, older than any other slave on the plantation, hair gone gray, skin deep-lined, eyes clouded slightly from age but sharp where it mattered. Thomas nodded once. "Work won't wait for weather." Samuel snorted softly. "Work waits for the master's horses sometimes, but not for us. That's the way of it." He stepped closer, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. His gaze narrowed. "I hear you've been called up to the house again today." Thomas kept his face as blank as a locked door. "Mistress says the study window leaks." "That's so," Samuel said mildly. "Storm like this, I reckon windows all over might leak." Thomas didn't answer. Samuel leaned close enough that Thomas could smell damp wool and horses on him. "Listen well, boy. In a house like that, a window ain't just a window. Nobody calls a field hand into the master's study to fix drafts. Not unless they're fixing something else, too." Thomas tightened his grip on the bucket handle. "Just wood and caulk," he said. "Nothing more." Samuel held his gaze for a long moment. That old man had seen more than Thomas could imagine, survived longer than logic or luck could explain. He was the one person who might know the truth behind whispers. Finally, Samuel grunted. "Sure, just windows." He turned to go, but paused with his back still to Thomas. "Ghosts see things other men don't. But ghosts best remember one thing. Folks notice when something invisible starts showing up places it ain't meant to be." He tapped his cane once against the ground. "Don't get seen in the wrong room." With that, he walked into the gray haze of rain, vanishing like fog. By mid-morning, the storm had eased into a steady drizzle. Thomas arrived at the main house dripping wet, boots squelching mud on the porch boards. Matilda met him at the door, face stern but eyes darting. "Don't look like you been standing in the rain," she muttered under her breath. Then, without waiting, she lifted a towel and began wiping at his sleeves, his collar, his face with swift, rough motions. She didn't ask if he wanted help. She made him presentable because a field slave couldn't show up looking like he'd been caught in a storm without being questioned. When she finished, she thrust his toolbox into his hands. "Straight to the study. Mistress said to expect you. And Thomas," he looked up. She lowered her voice. "The butler's sniffing around. Jenkins ain't said nothing yet, but he's watching. So watch him back, you hear?" Thomas nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "Good," she said sharply. Then, softer. "Just windows, ghost. Make sure that's all you look like you're fixing." He left her and stepped into the west wing. His heart thudded like a fist each time he passed a door. Every corner felt too sharp, every creak of the floorboards too loud. When he reached the study, he knocked once, exactly as Eleanor had instructed the previous evening. "Come in," came her voice. Calm, measured, as if nothing in the world was wrong. He entered. She was at the fireplace, stirring embers with an iron poker, pretending to warm the room. The stormlight through the windows made her dress look the color of slate instead of blue. A servant's tea tray sat untouched near the desk. "You're wet," she murmured, eyes flicking briefly over him. "Good. It gives us a reason to say you came quickly." He blinked. "A reason?" She tilted her head toward the window. "In case anyone asks why you were summoned before breakfast." She was always thinking ahead. He had to move faster just to keep up. "Master Caldwell returns tonight instead of leaving today," she said quietly, without turning from the fire. "The storm delayed his business. That gives us less time, but more cover. Everyone's distracted. Let's use it." Thunder murmured faintly outside, like a warning not quite done. Eleanor set down the poker and walked to the bookcase. She pressed her fingers to 3 specific books, one after another. A small click sounded behind the wood. "Watch closely," she said. The bookcase didn't swing open like last time. Instead, a single panel lowered inward, revealing the steel door of a safe black, Heavy, deceptively ordinary. My husband thinks hiding the safe behind books is clever, she said dryly. But the true hiding place is not the safe. It's what the safe protects. She dialed the combination rapidly, left 18, right 42. Left 7, just as she'd described the night before. The door clicked open with a sound Thomas felt more than heard. Eleanor pulled out a ledger the size of a brick and a stack of folded papers. "These," she said, "are the foundation of his house of lies." She turned and walked toward the far wall, stopping before the wainscoting. "Now, watch carefully." Her fingers pressed a knot in the carved wood. This time, a narrow section of paneling swung outward, revealing a small room hardly larger than a closet. Inside were a desk, a stool, a shelf of blank paper, ink, quills, and an oil lamp. The air inside smelled faintly of old wood and dust, but underneath that hope and danger and history. "This house hid escaped slaves long before my husband bought it," she said. "This room is a leftover piece of someone else's rebellion. Now, it will serve ours." Thomas stepped closer, pulse hammering. The hidden space was tight, but deep enough that if he sat at the desk, no one outside would see even his shadow. It felt like stepping inside a throat that could swallow him whole but also spit him out reborn. Eleanor lit the lamp. "You'll begin copying. Every figure, every name, every note. Exact handwriting, perfect spelling, no errors." "What if someone comes?" Thomas asked. She pointed to the wall panel. "I'll be on the outside. If you hear 3 quick knocks, extinguish the flame. Hide the papers beneath the false bottom drawer. Don't make a sound." She handed him the ledger. Heavy. Too heavy for its size. Not just ink and paper, but lives and futures trapped in columns and numbers. "You have 2 hours," she said. "Before lunch, the staff will gather for meal prep and no one will wonder where I am." He stepped into the hidden room, and for a moment, he didn't feel like he was entering a place to write. It felt like stepping into a storm stronger than the one outside. The quill scratched across the page in slow, precise strokes. Ink made a mirror of secrets. Thomas copied illegal shipments, names of investors, coded payments, missing portions of Eleanor's inheritance, transfers hidden under false property names, all while the ledger's columns seemed to whisper, "Your life hangs in every line." Sometimes Eleanor whispered explanations through the panel like a ghost speaking to another ghost. "See this land purchase in Charleston? Not land. A house for his mistress. Look at this transfer to New York. Money for weapons. Here, these initials? That's a federal senator, paid to look away." Thomas had never imagined numbers could rot like this, that they could bleed, that a man could kill with ink. He worked faster. Hours passed. His hand cramped. His eyes stung. He didn't dare stop. Then, 3 sharp knocks. The lamp went dark instantly. He shoved papers into the hidden drawer. Breath caught in his lungs like a trapped bird. Voices filled the study. Eleanor's calm soprano, and a deeper, colder voice that Thomas would recognize anywhere. Master Caldwell had returned early. He cursed softly about the storm, complained of the overseer's incompetence, asked why his wife lingered in the study during a workday. She answered smoothly, claiming she was sorting household expenses, asking after his business, smiling through lies like she'd been born to do it. He moved around the room. His boots thudded too close. The safe door rattled as he touched it. Thomas's body went still, breath shallow, spine pressed against the back of the hidden room, as if he could disappear into wood. Finally, the voices faded. The door closed. 2 soft taps. Safe again. Thomas relit the lamp with shaking fingers and returned to work. Hours later, Eleanor took the copied pages from him and locked the originals away. Her eyes shone not with triumph, but with sharp calculation. "You did well," she whispered. "Tomorrow, we begin on the letters." A chill went through him. Letters meant names. Names meant people who would kill to stay hidden. "Until then," she continued, "you must look like a field hand fixing windows. Do your work. Don't stare too long at anything. Look dull. Look tired. Look invisible. He stepped out into the hall, toolbox in hand, shoulders slumped, eyes downcast. A slave again. A shadow. When he reached the end of the corridor, a soft voice called to him. Boy. He turned. Jenkins, the butler, stood halfway down the staircase. Eyes like pins. Expression unreadable. You've been in the West Wing quite often, Jenkins said slowly. Unusual for a field hand. Thomas kept his face blank. Mistress says the window's leaking, sir. Storm's making it worse. Jenkins stepped closer, his shoes silent on the carpet. Storms have a way of showing cracks in a house. And in people. Thomas bowed his head. Yes, sir. Jenkins smiled, thin and sharp as a blade. Keep your hands where they belong. He walked away without waiting for a response. That evening, when Thomas returned to the cabins, Samuel was waiting just inside the door. You were seen, Samuel murmured. Thomas's blood went cold. Seen doing what? Being places you shouldn't be, Samuel said. Ghosts ain't meant to cast shadows in the big house. You telling me to stop? Thomas asked. Samuel shook his head slowly. I'm telling you, ghosts don't get second chances if they get caught. Then he looked Thomas dead in the eye. And I'm telling you, whichever road you're on now, boy, don't walk it slow. Rain ticked softly against the window. The storm outside had passed, but the storm around him was just beginning. Thomas lay awake long into the night, fingers resting on the key hidden beneath his shirt. Tomorrow, he would copy the letters. Tomorrow, he would step deeper into the master's secrets. Tomorrow, Ghost would stop hiding in shadows and become one. By the time the clouds cleared, the real storm was already on the road. A single rider galloped along the mud-slick highway toward Charleston, cloak snapping in the wind. In one of his saddlebags, wrapped in oiled cloth, was a letter written in a butler's neat, careful hand. Jenkins had written what he'd seen and what he suspected. The mistress, too often in the study. The field slave brought repeatedly into the West Wing. Doors locked that should have stayed open. He never accused them outright. He didn't have to. Men like Charles Caldwell knew how to read between lines. The letter flew ahead of the future like a warning shot. On the plantation, Thomas had no idea any of this was happening. All he knew was that the sun finally came out, and with it came the carriage. It stood in the yard near noon the next day, polished, gleaming, horses restless. But this time, it wasn't Caldwell boarding it, it was a stranger. Thomas watched from a distance as a man in a dusty coat and plain hat stepped down, carrying a weathered valise. He didn't look like an official, or a wealthy guest, or a slave trader. He looked forgettable. The kind of man people's eyes slipped over, which, Thomas was learning, was a kind of power all its own. The stranger handed the reins to a stable boy and walked without hesitation toward the main house. By early afternoon, whispers buzzed through the kitchen. Traveling preacher, some say. Others say a bookman, selling Bibles and such. Come to see mistress. Master ain't even here. Thomas didn't react. He kept scrubbing the mud from his boots in the corner, pretending the only thing on his mind was the grit between the treads. But his heartbeat picked up when Matilda drifted past him, setting a pot onto the stove a little harder than she needed to. Study windows, she muttered low enough only he could hear. Mistress says they still need seeing to. That was his summons. He knocked once on the study door and entered when Eleanor called. Yes? The preacher stood by the window, apparently admiring the view. Up close, Thomas could see he was maybe in his 40s, with a gentle face that didn't quite hide the steel in his eyes. His coat was plain but well made, his hands ink-stained. This is the young man I mentioned, Eleanor said, playing her part, voice light and polite. Thomas. He's been helping with repairs. The stranger nodded to him, nothing more than a courteous dip of the chin. In that tiny gesture, Thomas read something that made his chest tighten. Recognition. Not of who Thomas was, but of what he was now entangled in. Afternoon, son, the man said, his accent northern, words clipped smooth. Lord blessed you with steady hands, I hear. Thomas kept his eyes low. I do my best, sir. Thomas, Eleanor said brightly. You may fix that draft near the bookcase now. It's been bothering me. Her eyes flicked once to the shelves. The message beneath her words hit him like a tap on the shoulder. Go. He crossed the room with his toolbox, while the stranger launched into a gentle, meandering talk about scripture and faith and how a home needed strong foundations. To anyone listening outside the door, it was harmless chatter. To Thomas, it was cover a soft blanket thrown over something sharp. He reached the bookcase, pressed the familiar hidden catch, and slipped into the concealed room, closing the panel behind him. A moment later, the lamp glowed to life, lit from the outside by Eleanor's careful hand. He could hear their voices faintly through the wall. "The Lord sees what is done in secret, Mrs. Caldwell," the preacher was saying, "but sometimes he sends helpers to see that justice is done on earth as well." "Then I hope he's sent one today," she replied. The coded conversation washed over Thomas as he gathered the copies they'd already made, ledgers and letters, stacking them neatly, tying them with string. His hands shook only once. He thought of Lily, of his mother's grave, of Samuel's warnings, of the dogs he'd once heard in the distance chasing someone who never came back. Then he thought of the underground room he stood in and the invisible road it represented. A road north. The panel whispered open behind him. Eleanor slipped inside, closing it carefully. Her normally composed face had cracks in it today, exhaustion, strain, something like hope sitting uneasily beside fear. "This is Mr. Avery," she said quietly. "He'll take the first set of documents to Boston. My family will ensure they reach the right hands." "Ma'am," Thomas said. Avery stepped into view, hat now in his hands. In the close lamplight, his eyes looked tired but focused. "So you're the one taking the risk," he said, studying Thomas. "You understand what this means?" "I understand if anyone finds out," Thomas said evenly. "I'll be dead before the day's done." "That's part of it," Avery said. "But I meant the other side. Once these reach federal agents and Boston lawyers and newspapers that don't fear men like Caldwell, the world doesn't stay the same. Not for him. Not for the people tied to him. Not for you." "Good," Thomas said. "It's been the same too long." Avery's mouth twitched into a faint smile. "Fair enough." Eleanor handed him the bundled papers. "These are the ledgers and the majority of the letters. I'll keep one set of copies here as insurance." Avery slid the package into a hidden pocket within his coat, sewn there for exactly this purpose. "If I'm stopped and searched," he said frankly, "I'm a traveling preacher with Bible verses and boring sermons. They won't look twice. Men like your husband never suspect people like me are carrying anything heavier than words." He glanced at Thomas. "If something happens to me before I reach the city." He studied him for a heartbeat longer. No, that's a worry for another day. Today, we move." He shook Eleanor's hand, turned to Thomas, and offered his. Thomas hesitated, then gripped it. The man's handshake was firm, human, grounding. "Whatever happens next," Avery said quietly, "remember, you pushed the first stone. The rest of the avalanche isn't in your hands alone." Then he left, slipping back through the panel and into his sermon about storms and foundations, his words drifting faintly as he walked away in the open, carrying an invisible war under his coat. 2 days later, the first cannonball came back. Caldwell's carriage rolled into the yard at dusk, wheels crunching gravel, horses frothing. He climbed down with the same practiced arrogance as always, but something in his movement was different, tighter, focused. He did not greet his wife. He did not praise the overseer. He went straight into the house without removing his gloves. The air on the plantation changed, like someone had sucked the warmth out of it. That night, the big house felt like a loaded gun. Thomas was back in the fields the next morning when the summons came. "Ghost," the overseer shouted. "Master wants you. Study. Now." Every muscle in Thomas's body tensed. He wiped his hands slowly, buying himself 3 extra seconds to breathe. As he walked toward the house, Samuel intercepted him near the fence line. "Storms moved indoors," the old man said. "I can feel it in my bones." Thomas kept moving. "He back?" "Back and carrying lightning," Samuel said. He grabbed Thomas's elbow, eyes sharp. "Whatever you been doing, whatever you think you still got time for, you don't." Thomas swallowed. You saying I should run now? I'm saying choose quick, Samuel said. Men like Caldwell, they don't swing slow. And remember what I told you. Betrayal don't always come where you expect it from. He let go. Thomas kept walking. Caldwell was waiting in the study, standing with his back to the window like a man judging his own land from a painting. Eleanor sat in a chair nearby, hands folded in her lap, face composed. Jenkins lurked in a corner like a shadow nailed to the wall. Ah, Caldwell said without turning. The famous ghost. Come in. Thomas stepped inside, eyes low, heart thudding. I hear you've developed a talent for windows, Caldwell drawled. My wife seems very taken with your handiwork. Yes, master, Thomas murmured. Caldwell strode toward the nearest window and ran his gloved hand along the frame. Interesting thing about storms, he said. They don't just show you where the drafts are. They show you where the rot is. His fingers paused over a section Thomas had recalked days ago. I have received some very concerning news from town, Caldwell said conversationally, about federal men asking questions, about certain businessmen's names being whispered in places they should not be. Silence settled over the room like dust. Thomas kept his gaze on the rug. He could feel Eleanor's eyes on him like a touch. Imagine my surprise, Caldwell continued, voice smoothing into something even more dangerous, when I considered who might possibly be behind such curiosity. A foolish competitor? An enemy? Or perhaps someone closer to home? He turned suddenly. Look at me. Every survival instinct Thomas had screamed no. But he lifted his eyes. Caldwell's gaze was cold, weighing, calculating. There was no pretense in it now. No charm. My butler tells me you and my wife have spent a great deal of time in this wing while I've been away, Caldwell said. He tells me you've been alone with her. In my study. Thomas said nothing. There was nothing he could say that wouldn't be a lie or a confession. Eleanor spoke instead. Charles, she said gently, you're chasing ghosts. I asked for him because he works well and quietly. Our servants are few. Your study windows were leaking. Silence, Caldwell snapped. The word cracked across the room like a whip. Eleanor's mouth closed, jaw tight. He stepped closer to Thomas. So near Thomas could smell sweat and road dust under the expensive cologne. A field slave who can read a newspaper, Caldwell said softly. Now, that is a curious thing, isn't it? Thomas's blood went cold. You think I don't watch? Caldwell went on. You think I don't notice when animals learn tricks they were never meant to know? I asked him to bring me the newspaper once, Eleanor said quietly. I told him the pictures amused me. Perhaps you misinterpreted, Caldwell whirled on her. You think I'm a fool? Eleanor? You think because you write little letters and hide in your rooms that I don't see you? He stalked to the bookcase. Thomas's heart stopped. Caldwell's hands went straight to the hidden catches. He pressed. The panel opened, revealing the safe. I received a letter in Charleston, he said calmly, spinning the dial. Someone suggested I might want to inspect my house a little more thoroughly. Jenkins's gaze flickered. Just once, then returned to its trained neutrality. The safe opened with a dull clank. Caldwell pulled out the ledger, flipped it open. His fingers traced certain pages. His eyes narrowed. Everything seems to be in place, he murmured. And yet, he shut it again. Slowly. There is a scent here, he said, turning back to them. The scent of meddling, of disobedience, of betrayal. He walked toward Thomas, unhurried. I could have you whipped to death on general principle, he said conversationally. Hang you from the oak for the crows. Claim you tried to touch my wife. Tried to steal from my study. No one would question it. No one would mourn you who matters. Thomas forced himself not to flinch. But I am not an impulsive man, Caldwell went on. I prefer certainty, evidence, and when possible, profit. He grabbed Thomas's chin, forcing his face up. Tell me, boy, Caldwell whispered. Have you been in my safe? The room fell away. There was only that question and the roar of blood in his ears. Thomas met his eyes. Somewhere deep inside fear, an old buried anger stirred. I go where I'm told to go, master, he said quietly. No further. Caldwell studied him for a long, tight moment, searching his face for cracks. Then he let go, shoving Thomas's head aside. Get out, he said. Back to the fields. For now. The for now dragged behind Thomas like a chain as he left. He didn't make it far. In the side corridor near the back stairs, Matilda snagged his arm and yanked him into the laundry room. What happened? She hissed. He knows something, Thomas said. Not what? Not yet. But he's sniffing. He's more than sniffing, Matilda said. He's got Jenkins writing letters. He's got the overseer whispering about making an example of somebody soon. To restore order. Thomas's chest tightened. He'll come back to the study. You think he'll find the hidden room? I think a man like that finds whatever he wants bad enough, she said. Listen to me. Her grip tightened. Mistress told me some of what you two been up to. Not everything. Enough. You need to decide. Stay and hope those papers get him before he gets you. Or go. Go where? Thomas asked. North? You know how many don't make it? You know how many don't make it staying? She shot back. He opened his mouth. Closed it. Matilda's voice dropped. Mistress is planning something for tonight. After supper. She said if things went bad with the master, you'd have to move fast. West entrance. Stables. Talk to Samuel. That's all I know. That's all I want to know. She released him, turning back to her washing as if nothing at all had been said. Night fell like a curtain drawn too quickly. The main house glittered with lamplight. Laughter floated from the dining room, brittle and forced. Caldwell had invited 2 neighboring planters for supper. As if nothing at all was wrong, Eleanor smiled and smiled, pouring wine, making polite conversation, playing the beautiful, empty wife with such skill that anyone who didn't know better would have believed it. Thomas watched from the shadows of the hallway as servants moved dishes in and out, as Jenkins poured brandy, as Caldwell laughed too loudly at something one of the guests said. He waited. When the last guest left and the last glass was put away, the house finally began to quiet. Servants retired to their quarters. Lamps went out one by one. The west servants' entrance creaked open on silent hinges. Thomas. He turned. Eleanor stood there, wrapped in a dark shawl, hair pulled back tight, eyes sharper than he'd ever seen them. We don't have time, she said. He sent another letter this afternoon. I heard Jenkins mention it. By tomorrow, he'll have men here who aren't afraid to spill blood in his name. So this is it, Thomas said. This is it. She agreed. She pressed a small folded scrap of paper into his hand. It's Lily, she said quietly. Her last recorded sale. Town. Owner's name. Route. I found it in the real ledger he keeps hidden inside the safe wall. I copied it. You'll need help reading some of the names when you're free. But it's a trail. His throat closed. He couldn't speak. He just gripped the paper so hard it crinkled. In the hidden room, she continued, under the desk, there's an exit tunnel that leads to the old root cellar near the stables. It was used for runaways. Samuel knows the path. He'll have a wagon ready, with a loose plank for you to hide under. What about you? Thomas said. Her eyes flickered, but she didn't look away. I'll stay, she said. I'm still his wife. I still have tools left. I can scream loud enough for Boston to hear me if he tries to make me disappear. You have none of that. If you stay, he breaks you first, to warn everyone else. Come with me, Thomas said before he could stop himself. Pain flashed across her face. My daughter is north, she said. Yes, but if I vanish without a trace, he'll claim I ran off with you. He'll poison every word I wrote, every paper I sent. He'll say I was mad, or wicked, or both. My testimony dies with me. She stepped closer, voice barely above a whisper. If one of us reaches freedom, it has to be you first. You're the one he thinks has no voice. That makes you the one he'll never expect to speak. He stared at her, at the woman who had dragged him into this and also cracked his world open. In another life, she said quietly, we would have been just 2 people reading in a quiet room. Not prey, not property, not trapped in someone else's story. Just people. "In another life," he said, "my sister wouldn't be a name on a bill of sale." They stood there for a heartbeat, sharing a silence too big for words. Footsteps creaked upstairs. "Go," she said sharply. "Now," he nodded once. "Thomas," she added as he turned, "if you live, and if you ever stand on a street where no one owns you, don't forget the ones still here. Don't let this house swallow the next ghost whole." He met her eyes and gave the smallest, truest promise he'd ever spoken. "I won't." Then he went. The hidden room swallowed him one last time. This time, he didn't sit at the desk. He crawled past it, feeling along the back wall until his fingers found the small latch Eleanor had described. The panel slid open into darkness. He slipped into the tunnel, pulling it shut behind him. It smelled of earth and old fear. Rocks scraped his knees. The narrow passage sloped downward, then slowly angled up again. Above, he could faintly hear muffled sounds, the creak of floorboards, a raised voice, something slamming. Caldwell had found out she'd moved a piece without his permission. The argument had begun. Thomas kept moving. When he reached the cellar, Samuel was waiting, lantern hooded low, wagon visible through the open door. "Took your time," the old man muttered. "Come on, Ghost. Time to be flesh and blood." They moved quickly. Samuel helped him slide under a loose plank in the wagon bed, covering him with sacks and a scattering of loose straw. "You drive this toward town," Samuel said softly, "until you hear 3 knocks on the side. That'll be Pike's boy meeting you. From there, you're on a road. I don't know." "You're not coming?" Thomas asked from the shadows. Samuel shook his head. "My fight's here. Yours ain't no more." He hesitated, then added, "Your daddy tried once. He didn't make it. Maybe it's fitting his boy does." The words hit Thomas like a blessing and a burden at once. The wagon jolted as Samuel climbed into the driver's seat. As they rolled away from the only home Thomas had ever known, he risked one small peek through a crack. He saw the main house receding, lamps burning in the west wing, shadows moving behind curtains. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw a figure in the study window, hand pressed to the glass. Maybe he imagined it. Maybe not. He lay back, listening to the creak of wheels, the rhythm of hooves, the night sounds folding over them. Somewhere dogs barked, then faded. The road changed beneath the wheels from packed plantation dirt to rougher country ruts. Eventually, 3 sharp knocks hit the wagon's side. The next voice he heard was new but familiar in the way Eleanor had described. "Solomon Pike," the man said quietly, lifting the plank. "You must be Thomas." Moonlight caught a face lined by worry and resolve. "Ma'am," said the mockingbird still sings. Thomas whispered. Solomon's mouth curved into a grim smile. "Then let's make sure it keeps singing someplace it can't be caged." He offered his hand. Thomas took it and pulled himself up into a world that, for the first time in 19 years, did not already own him. Months later, in a crowded northern city, a man stepped off a train carrying a worn coat, a folded piece of paper with the name of a town and an owner, and a heart that still wasn't sure how to beat in a world without overseers. Thomas walked streets where no one called him boy, where men with his skin walked freely, poor, harassed, watched, but not owned. It was not heaven. It wasn't easy, but it was not the plantation. He found work in a warehouse first, then at a printing shop where ink didn't mean chains but news, and names, and power. News about a disgraced Southern businessman under federal investigation, about weapons shipments exposed, about a plantation family's name dragged into court. Sometimes the articles mentioned a Northern-born wife who provided crucial evidence. They never used her name. But Thomas knew. He rented a small, cold room. Prayed his sister wasn't in one worse. One gray morning, he stood in front of a narrow house on a quiet street in a town whose name matched the faded scrawl on the paper Eleanor had given him. His heart pounded harder than it had the day he stepped into the master's bedroom. He raised his hand and knocked. A pause. Footsteps. The door cracked open. Chain still on. A young woman peered out, eyes cautious, mouth set in a line life had carved there. Her eyes were dark, familiar. "Can I help you?" she asked. Thomas's throat closed. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. Then, with a voice that belonged to a man and not a ghost, he said, "I'm looking for someone. A girl who was sold from the Caldwell plantation 6 years ago. Her name was Lily." The chain slid back. The door opened wider. The young woman stared at him like she was seeing something she'd tried to forget. "Thomas?" she whispered. And just like that, all the ledgers and letters and secrets and storms collapsed into the only thing that had ever truly mattered. A promise kept. Out there in the dirt and dust of history, men like Charles Caldwell had believed ink could chain the world forever. They were wrong. Sometimes, quietly, in the back of a hidden room, a slave picked up a pen and rewrote the ending.